The first thing he saw, no, wasn't the girl. It was the sign nailed into a twisted mesquite trunk, stained with something darker than rust. "White man will find you." Each letter carved with a rage too focused to be drunk, too raw to be forgotten. And below it, something moved. A figure slumped, not hanging limp like the dead, but swaying gently, alive, barely. Her arms were bound behind her, dislocated at strange angles. Feet grazed the dirt like a whisper. Around her throat, the rope wasn't tight enough to kill fast, just cruel enough to let death take its time. Behind her, a wind chime. Not the kind you'd find outside a rancher's door. This one was made from bone small and brittle coyote paws, maybe. Or something else. Bits of copper threaded between them. It clinked faintly in the desert breeze. A haunting lullaby. A mockery of music. The rancher's horse snorted beneath him. Uneasy. He didn't move. Not yet. He studied her face, what was left visible beneath streaks of red paint and dust. She was young, Apache, maybe 15, maybe 17, painted with shame, not pride, a crude red band smeared across her brow, a broken feather pinned to dried blood. No posse, no sign of law, just her, the tree, the wind, and the bones that sang like a warning. The wind shifted and one of the bone fragments twisted on its copper thread to face him. It had teeth still embedded in it. He didn't ride closer. Not yet. This part of the desert no man's land between the reservation trails and cattle routes was rumored cursed. Not by spirits, but by people. White folks called it Coyote Gulch. Locals called it Red Soil. And the Apache. They didn't speak of it, which made the message clear. This was a warning, not an execution. He looked again at the sign. "White man will find you." But the last word "you" had a second meaning now. Was it for her or for him? The rancher had seen things. In Dodge, in Tombstone, in war. He'd seen what white men did when they were afraid. What they did when they were sure no one would speak. And here, someone had spoken with rope, knife, and bone. He took one step forward. The girl didn't flinch. She was past flinching. Flies buzzed near her scalp. A trickle of blood moved sluggishly from her ear. Every few moments, her toes touched the dust, just enough to hold her here, not enough to help her breathe. Her lips were cracked open, dried, not pleading, but her eyes. They weren't closed. They were staring past him, locked on something behind the horizon, a place he could never see. A vulture landed silently on a branch above her, not to feed, just to wait. It blinked once, then stared directly at the rancher, and for a moment, it felt like judgment. He knew what this was. It wasn't justice. It wasn't outlaw punishment. It was a message designed to rot in the sun, to frighten, not to kill. Yet she was dying anyway. And that made it worse. His horse pawed the ground, shaking the rein. The wind shifted again. The bone chime turned, and for the first time it sang a single note, a clear, high-pitched hum, almost beautiful, almost human. He thought of his wife, or maybe just the memory of her. Her laughter used to sound like wind across a bottle's neck, high, sudden. Now, that sound was gone. He looked back at the girl. Was she laughing at him, or was the desert? He clenched his jaw. One twitch of his wrist and he could ride on. No one would blame him. Hell, most would call him smart. But he didn't ride on. He dismounted. Slowly. The ground was hard underfoot, sun-blasted. Each crunch of his boot sounded louder than it should. The girl swayed again. Her head lolled. A shallow breath wheezed out from her nose, still alive. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled a canteen, shook it, not much left. He stepped closer. The vulture didn't move, neither did she. He studied the knot. Old rope. Stretched thin, he unsheathed his knife, not the sharp one for cattle, the one he hadn't used since the war. He raised it slowly, careful not to startle her. Her eyes shifted barely. One twitch toward the blade. For a second, He saw something in her eyes. Not fear. Recognition. Like she'd seen this moment before. Like she'd waited for it. Like the desert had shown it to her in dreams or dust or madness. He cut the rope. She fell like a sack of bones. No scream. No resistance. Just the dull, awful sound of someone hitting the earth and not bothering to live or die. The wind blew harder. The bone chime clattered, spinning wildly now. But no one looked at it. The rancher knelt beside her. Her skin was hot, fevered. Her pulse was a whisper. One eye fluttered. He touched her shoulder. And for the first time, she blinked, then closed her eyes. Some signs warn you to turn back. Others dare you to become something more than a man. He looked again at the sign on the tree. White man will find you. But now the girl was on the ground, and the rope was cut. So maybe the sign had been right after all, because he had found her. The bone chime let out one final clink as he lifted her in his arms and began walking into silence, into heat, into whatever came next. He hadn't carried another human being in over a decade, not since the war, not since his brother bled out in his arms in a muddy cornfield back east, whispering about a girl who'd never written back. Now here he was, holding a girl whose name he didn't know. Apache, bones like twigs, face painted in warning, not in ceremony, skin burned red by sun and shame. He didn't ask if she was alive. He already knew she was barely, but she wasn't awake. Not yet, and maybe that was mercy. He laid her across the saddle like broken firewood, tied a loose strap across her hips to keep her steady. Every bump would hurt her, but every mile not taken would kill her. The vulture above watched him go, still silent. The wind was at his back. The bone chime faded with distance, but its song stayed in his chest, rattling inside like guilt. As he rode away, the shadow of the hanging tree stretched longer than it should, like it didn't want to let her go. He didn't head home. Home was too far and too stained. Instead, he guided the mare toward the sandstone ridge. There was a split there, a low cavern just wide enough for a man and a fire. He'd slept there once in a storm. The rocks stayed warm through the night, and the coyotes kept their distance. It was the only place he could think of where the wind didn't talk so loud. The ride was slow. Every step. Her body shifted slightly. He kept glancing back, not out of fear, but out of shame. What had they done to her? Why this? Why the rope? The bones? The sign? He'd heard rumors. In Yuma, they said an Apache girl had stabbed a preacher in the middle of a sermon, said his words burned her ancestors. In Tucson, folks whispered that one had poisoned a white cattleman's well and laughed as the calves died choking. Truth, folklore, hatred. He didn't care. Because the girl on his saddle had eyes like someone who'd stopped believing in stories. They reached the ridge by dusk. Shadows stretched like fingers along the rock walls. The wind here was gentler, like it, too, had run out of breath. He tied the horse, pulled the girl down, slower this time. Her limbs bent unnaturally. Every joint like it had forgotten how to be part of a body. He carried her into the rock alcove. It wasn't much, just earth, stone, and an old horseshoe nailed above the entrance. But the silence felt clean, untouched. He laid her down on a bed of dry grass, uncorked the canteen, poured a little on a cloth, dabbed the edges of her mouth, careful not to let the water spill down her cracked skin. Still, she didn't wake, but her lips twitched, as if they remembered the shape of thank you. He reached for her hands, still bound at the wrists. The rope had dug deep. Beneath the dried blood, her skin was split, purple, swollen. He pulled out his knife again, and hesitated. Not out of fear, out of reverence. She'd survived with those bindings. They had become part of her, part of whatever power had kept her breathing. Still, he cut. The rope unraveled like a curse undone, and for the first time, her fingers twitched, bent slowly, as if testing the air. He started a fire. No words. Just the sounds of stone on flint, the crackle of new flame, the sigh of wind hitting warm rock. He poured beans into a tin pot. The smell rose sharp, metallic, almost sweet. She didn't move. He glanced at her again. Dust caked her eyebrow. Her lips had peeled. Her cheek had a bruise shaped like a hand. A big one. His jaw clenched. He took off his coat and draped it over her. Then, for the first time, he spoke. Just one sentence. "You're safe now, just breathe." No reply, not even a flicker. But something in the cave shifted. The air felt heavier, like the earth had heard him and approved. Night fell slow and deep. He didn't sleep. Just sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle without purpose. The stars above were sharp, the kind that make a man feel like the only thing alive in a dead world. And yet, he wasn't alone. Not really. The girl breathed, a shallow, rhythmless breath. But it was enough. Some men ride past the broken, but the lonely see themselves in every wound. Somewhere past midnight, she stirred, not fully, but her head turned, just an inch, toward the fire. He looked up, met her half-lidded eyes. No words, just a look, and in that look, something strange. Not trust, not fear, something older, recognition. As if she'd seen him once before in another life, another fate, another almost death. Then she closed her eyes again, and the fire crackled like a promise. As the coals dimmed, he poured warm water into a tin bowl, steam rising soft. His hand hovered over her shoulder, unsure whether to wake her gently or let the healing begin without words. He didn't wake her with words. He woke her with water, warm, slow, deliberate, dripped across her cracked lips from his cupped hand, like feeding a dying bird. At first, it ran down her chin. She coughed, shallow and weak, but her eyes fluttered open, not wide, not afraid, just open. He didn't speak. He dipped the cloth again, dipped it into the bowl and wrung it gently, then wiped the dried blood from her temple. It came away dark, thick, almost rust-colored in the firelight. The cave flickered with orange shadows. His horse stamped softly outside. But inside, there was no movement except the steam between them and her blinking. She tried to sit up, failed. He caught her shoulder and whispered, "Don't." Her eyes moved, searching his face, not for answers, for evidence. Was he like the others or something worse kind before cruelty? But his hand didn't press. It hovered, waited, and when her head dropped back onto the coat, he dipped the cloth again. She reached. Suddenly, not for him, but for the bowl, her fingers trembling. Knocked it. He caught it mid-tip, not a drop spilled. She looked at him, and something inside her, some brittle tension, released. She drank. Slowly. He didn't rush her. Every swallow sounded too loud, each breath after too quiet. He lifted the pot of beans from the coals, stirred it once. The scent filled the space. He held out a spoonful. She looked at it, then at him. One beat, two. Then her lips parted. She ate, not like a starving person, like someone rediscovering what food even was. Outside, the moon shifted behind a cloud. Inside, her hand touched the rim of the bowl. Then, as if remembering the meaning of politeness or survival, she nodded. Not a thank you, not quite. More like I acknowledge your mercy. For now, he returned the nod. The silence stretched again. Not awkward, not painful, just wide, like a canyon between two people who've lived too long alone. He pulled a blanket from his roll, draped it over her legs, then, without a word, he sat, cross-legged, just near enough that she could hear his breathing, just far enough not to crowd. She watched him. Not his face, his hands, and calloused, scarred, thick-knuckled, the hands of a man who'd done bad things, but also hands that washed her face instead of striking it. She touched her wrist, the place where the rope had bit deep. It was red, swollen. She flinched. He noticed, didn't speak, just pulled a tin from his saddlebag, opened it, salve brown, thick, herbal-smelling. He scooped a bit with his finger, held it up, waited. She hesitated, then held out her wrist. He applied it like a prayer, carefully, tenderly, as if she were made of smoke. Minutes passed. The fire popped. The cave sighed. And then unexpected she spoke. One word, Annie. Her voice was hoarse, almost inaudible. He looked up. I don't speak Apache. She nodded slightly. Mean, I see you. A pause. Then she closed her eyes again. He didn't ask her name. Didn't offer his... Names were sharp things. They defined people before the soul could finish shaping. Instead, he pulled a coal from the fire, tucked it into a tin lantern, and hung it just outside the cave. A small flame, flickering in the wind. Not enough to guide anyone, but enough to say someone's still alive here. Inside, her chest rose and fell, still shallow, but steadier now. He set his rifle across his lap. Not because he expected danger, because that's what men like him do when they sit in silence with memories. And the silence was heavy with them now. His gaze flicked to her again. The bruises on her face were fresh, but the shadows in her eyes, those were older. Older than yesterday, older than the rope, older maybe than the bones that sang. Healing doesn't begin with medicine. It begins when someone looks at you and doesn't turn away. The stars were high now, bright, sharp, cold. He remembered a night like this years ago, holding his wife's hand as she gave birth to a son who never cried. The silence then was louder than now. And yet tonight, with this broken girl in his cave, something felt different. Not fixed, not healed, just less hollow. She stirred again. This time, when she looked at him, her gaze held, still wary, still guarded, but not empty. She whispered, "My bird's gone." He blinked. What bird? Her eyes drifted shut. "The one I carry." And then she slept. He looked down at her fingers, thin, shaking. A smear of red paint still clung to one nail, and as he wiped it gently away, a faint outline appeared beneath. A mark he didn't recognize, a faded tattoo or symbol. He narrowed his eyes, the firelight catching its shape. Something ancient, something sacred, and something that told him her story hadn't even begun. At first, he thought it was just a shadow, a blotch beneath the dried paint and blood on her skin. But as the dawn crept across the cave floor, slow, golden, reverent, the shape became clear. A bird, not drawn, not scrawled, carved. A faint tattoo beneath her collarbone, where the ribs began to rise. Its wings curved inward, like shielding itself from something. One wing cracked, the lines disrupted by a healed scar. He stared at it in silence. She was still asleep, but not restless now. Breathing deep, one hand clutched the blanket like it anchored her to this world. He reached toward the bird, then stopped. Some marks weren't meant for touching, only for understanding. The fire had died down. Ash curled in soft spirals from the embers. He stood, stretched, stepped outside. The desert was pale and wide. Still, no birds, no wind, just the land, watching. He turned back to the cave. She was sitting up, barely, but up. "Water?" he asked. She nodded once. He brought it, sat beside her without touching. She drank, coughed, wiped her mouth, then said flatly, "They painted over it." He blinked. "The bird." She nodded. Why a long pause? She looked down, not at the bird, at her hands, because it was mine, not theirs. She ran a finger along the outline of the tattoo, then across the red streak they'd smeared above it. They said my bird carried bad omens, so they tried to bury it. But they didn't know how deep it went. He didn't press, didn't ask who they were, didn't ask why. Some stories are like dry bones, fragile, dangerous to unearth too quickly. Instead, he just listened, and that was enough. She began speaking, not in a rush, not in panic, just sentences, quiet and brittle. There was a man, said he was a trader, came to the village with goods and coffee, cloth, sugar, talked sweet, gave gifts. Her eyes didn't blink. He liked girls who listened. I listened too well. The rancher looked away. Not because he didn't want to see and because he couldn't bear the weight of what her eyes held. He told me to come with him, said I was different, that I had light in me. She laughed a bitter, hollow sound. The light was useful in the dark. She paused. Her lips trembled. Not fear, not pain. Shame. He took me to his camp. There were others. Women, a few kids, all marked, all painted. She pulled the blanket tighter around her. They made us wear the red stripe, called it cleansing, said it was to strip the old spirits. The rancher's fists clenched in his lap. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but chose not to care. They hung me when I tried to run, said I cursed the white men, that I'd whispered Apache spells. Her eyes finally met his. But I didn't curse them. I cursed the lie. A silence. Then softer. That they were better, kinder. That if we behaved, they'd let us live like them. She reached to her neck, touched the spot where the rope had burned her skin. Not scratching, just remembering. It still sings, she whispered. He frowned. The bones. I hear them when I sleep. The rancher stood, not abruptly, not angrily. He just needed to move. He walked to the cave's entrance, breathing the dry air, letting the anger cool in his chest before it boiled over. Then he spoke. I've heard bones sing before, after battles. When the wind moved through the bodies like flutes, she didn't reply. He turned to her, but I never heard a song survive a hanging. A pause. You're the first. She studied him again differently this time, as if deciding whether to believe in him. In the space between their silences, then slowly, she reached into the blanket folds, pulled out a small carved shape roughed and made of bone, the same shape as the tattoo. The bird. She held it in her palm. They tried to break it. I carved a new one, with my teeth. She smiled, not for joy, for defiance. He stepped forward, held out his hand. She hesitated, then dropped it into his palm. He studied the carving, wings curved, one side rougher, broken, but still, it looked like flight. He handed it back. She shook her head. No, you carry it now. Why? She looked at him with a sudden fire. Because you looked at me and didn't flinch. Some things are too sacred to carry alone. Even broken wings need hands to keep them in the sky. She leaned back against the wall, her strength fading again. But this time, her eyes stayed open, watching him. Trust beginning, not full, not safe, but beginning. He sat, held the carving in both hands, let the memory of her words settle in his chest. The bird had been buried beneath shame, and now it flew again. Even if only in the palm of a lonely man's hand. The wind stirred again outside the cave, soft, like breath. He turned the carving over once more, and noticed something on the back. 3 notches, carved deep. One for something lost, one for something survived, one waiting to be filled. He looked at her, and wondered if that last notch was for him. The next night, she didn't sleep. She lay on her side, facing the fire, eyes open, watching the flames dance across the cave wall like spirits dancing around a burial pyre. He sat opposite her, boots off, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, his face in shadow. The bird carving rested between them, placed gently on the dirt like an offering. Or a question. She whispered, "What's your name?" He didn't answer right away, so names were old thing. Waited. But her voice didn't ask for the man the world knew. It asked for the man the silence had shaped. He said, "Samuel." She nodded. "Mine's Nash Doitso." Then added, "But it's hard in your mouth, just say Nash." He repeated it. Once. Soft. Nash. It felt like a river stone, worn smooth by sorrow. Later, they shared bread. He tore it, handed half to her. She didn't thank him, just ate. A rhythm formed. Chew, silence, glance. And then, she reached across the fire, touched the back of his hand, not lingering, not claiming, just touching. The way a tree might lean against wind, Not to move, but to feel it pass. She took a coal from the edge of the fire and, with its charred tip, began drawing shapes on the wall. Circles, lines, then slowly a bird in flight, its wings uneven. One jagged, one wide. He watched. She said nothing, and when she finished, she left it there unfinished. Just a shape, flapping against stone. Later that night, she woke from a nightmare. Didn't scream, didn't thrash, just sat up, clutching her chest, whispering in Apache something that sounded like a prayer or an apology. He stirred, sat beside her, not touching. She said, "They used to sing while they hurt us, songs they didn't know the meaning of. Our songs, our words." A pause. "I don't remember the melodies anymore, only how it felt when they stopped." He wanted to say something, but the silence felt heavier than any comfort. So instead, he did something she hadn't expected. He hummed, low, uneven, rough, just a tune half remembered from his mother's kitchen, long before war and graves. Nash turned to him, startled. He didn't meet her eyes, just kept humming, and somewhere in that cracked melody, she found a place to lean. She rested her head against his shoulder, not for long, but long enough for the world to stop spinning. Outside, the desert held its breath. No wind, no coyotes, only the sound of two people still breathing. In the morning, he braided her hair. Neither spoke. Her fingers guided his, at first showing him how Apache women tie each section, how the strands carry meaning. One braid down the back, one over the shoulder forward, toward the heart. When he finished, she looked at him, not smiling, not weeping, just alive. More than yesterday when she stood without help, stepped outside the cave for the first time since he'd brought her. The wind met her with dust, warm and indifferent. She stood still. He followed, not close. Let her walk ahead. She turned. "Will you teach me how to shoot?" He raised an eyebrow. "You need to rest." She looked at him flatly. Resting never saved anyone. He sighed. "All right." He brought out the rifle, loaded it slow, showed her where to place her hands, where to lean her cheek. She was shaky at first. The gun kicked too hard, but she didn't flinch. By the third shot, she'd clipped a cactus arm clean. She looked back at him, eyes lit, not with pride, but with memory. Of who she'd been, who she might still be. When love arrives too late, it doesn't knock, it slips through silence, and stays only if you dare not speak it. That night, she sat closer to him, the fire low, the bird carving in her hand. He said, "I have nothing to give you." She looked at him. "You gave me not dying." He swallowed. She leaned in, not with urgency, not with hunger, just closeness. Her forehead rested against his. No kiss, but everything that would come before one, and maybe everything that would come after. They didn't speak of love, not in words, only in how they handed things water, firewood, their gaze, only in how he gave her the softest spot to sleep, only in how she brushed the dust from his coat each morning, only in the unfinished bird on the cave wall, still flying. She whispered once, "If I stay, they'll come again." He replied, "If you leave, I'll follow." She didn't say yes, didn't say no, but the next morning, she was still there, and in her silence she stayed. On the third day, the fire cracked wrong. A noise too sharp. Nash's head turned toward the ridge, eyes narrowing. He followed her gaze. And there, in the distance, hoof prints, fresh, and not theirs. She stepped back into the cave. He reached for his rifle. The bird carving was still there between them, but something in the air had changed. The wind was singing again, and this time, it sounded like warning. They came before noon. 3 riders, dust-gray hats, coats that hung too heavy for desert heat, the kind that hid things. Rifles, ropes, intent. The first one spat chewing tobacco onto a stone and grinned like a man used to being obeyed. Preacher says there's an Apache girl loose. Preacher says she sings curses. Preacher says she kills dreams in white towns. Nash stood behind Samuel. Didn't flinch. Didn't hide. Her hair was braided clean. Her face, unpainted now but more marked than ever. The lead rider leaned forward in the saddle. Preacher says she's his. Samuel stepped forward. This is my land. The man smiled. Didn't know Apache girls were part of ranch property now. Behind him, one of the others laughed. Short, ugly, empty. Samuel's hand rested on his belt, not drawing yet. Just reminding. This girl ain't owned. She's under my roof, which means she's yours now. A silence. Then Samuel said, she's free. Nash placed something in Samuel's hand. The bird carving, pressed it into his palm without a word. His fingers closed around it like a vow. The rider's smile vanished. He leaned forward. Preacher says she burned a church in Phoenix, poisoned a boy, whispered in tongues, turned the cattle blind. She didn't say she did. Just said she's the type that would. Samuel's voice lowered. I've heard that kind of talk before. It always ends in blood. Never truth. The second rider shifted in his saddle. We ain't here to talk. Nash stepped beside Samuel. He glanced at her, eyes warning, but she stood firm, unarmed, unshaking. One of the men sneered. She got nerve. Samuel raised his voice, calm but hard. You ride out now, you'll forget this place by sundown. You draw steel, you won't see another sunrise. The silence broke with a single click. Hammer drawn, not Samuel's. The third rider had raised his rifle. Samuel moved first. One shot, quick, clean, straight through the man's chest. He dropped like an emptied sack. The second drew too slow. Samuel rolled left, fired again, caught him in the thigh. He screamed, crumpled. The first rider tried to spur his horse. Nash moved, fast, silent. She leapt, grabbed his coat, yanked him off the saddle. He hit the ground hard. She kicked the rifle from his reach and stood over him, eyes burning. Samuel aimed down at him. The man whimpered. I'm just following the preacher's word. Samuel's voice was steady. Then go tell your preacher his word lost today. The man crawled backward, one eye swelling shut, blood at his lip. He didn't look back. The sun had moved across the ridge by the time they burned the bodies. Samuel buried the man he'd killed. Not for mercy, for honor. The other two he left with their horses, a warning written in hoofprints and ash. That night, the cave was quiet. No fire, just embers. Samuel sat, cleaning his rifle. Nash leaned against the wall, arms folded, not wounded, but changed. She said, You killed for me. He replied, No. She turned to him. I killed for the one I wanted to live beside. Some people save you once, but the ones who fight for you after the silence, those are the ones you never let go. He looked at the bird carving, still in his coat pocket. Unbroken, he pulled it out, held it up to the firelight. A crack now ran through the middle from the rider's boot. Maybe, but it held. Like her, she whispered, they'll come again. He nodded. Then we'll go farther, where they don't know your face, where they don't know mine. She touched the broken bird in his hand. Then they'll know ours together. He stared at her, the lines of her cheekbone and the braid over her heart. The fire reflected in her eyes. He said, You don't owe me anything, I know, but I owe you. She tilted her head. For what? For reminding me I still know how to live. Outside, a coyote howled. This time it didn't sound like hunger, and it sounded like warning passing into relief. At the edge of the cave, she laid something down, the last piece of the old wind chime. She'd carried it, the smallest bone. She set it beside the ashes of the fire and said, Let this song end here. Samuel didn't speak, but he understood. Some bones didn't need to sing anymore. Some ghosts had found peace. The next morning, as they packed their things, Nash stood at the cave wall. She touched the unfinished bird she'd drawn in coal, then added a final stroke, lifting its beak to the sky. Finished, she turned to Samuel and said, Now it flies, and together they rode into land unnamed, sky unpromised, and a future still being written. The bird no longer sang, not in bone, not in wind, not in warning. It had flown not into legend, but into quiet. Months passed. The desert changed color with the season. The dust settled differently. The shadows stretched slower, and the cave stood empty. Farther north, across a nameless ridge and past dry riverbeds, there stood a cabin, small, weathered, built from pine hauled in piece by piece. It didn't belong to any town, didn't show up on maps, but smoke rose from its chimney at dawn, and the sound of two voices sometimes speaking, sometimes not drifted softly in the mornings. Samuel was different now. He wore a knife on his hip, but rarely touched it. His beard was fuller, his hands softer. Not weak, just used to things that didn't break. Nash had taken to carving. Wood, mostly. Sometimes stone. She'd begun shaping birds, not broken ones. On the porch, they hung from leather straps, dozens of them. All with open wing. They didn't chime. They didn't rattle. They just swayed, quiet, whole. Inside, above the hearth, hung a single carving in bone. The original. Cracked, repaired. Not hidden, but honored. The only bone still allowed to speak. They didn't talk much about the riders, or the preacher, or the hanging tree. Those stories belonged to dust. Instead, they talked about planting onion, about the smell of coffee grounds, about a neighbor's runaway mule that wasn't really lost, just stubborn. Simple things, things that once felt impossible. One morning, Samuel woke to find Nash gone from the bed. He stepped onto the porch, heart racing. But she was there, standing barefoot in the dew. She held something in her hand. A feather. She didn't speak, just held it out. He took it, not from her hand, but her heart, and understood. They buried the last piece of the wind chime that night. Not out of hate, out of closure. Some songs were never meant to play forever. That winter, snow came early. They spent most days inside. She read from a book of stories in English. He listened, not always understanding, but always hearing. And when she laughed, he laughed too. They carved their names into the doorpost, not as owners, as survivors. And beside their names, a final image, a bird, in full flight. She came from the rope, but she stayed in the wind. And in that wind, I found what it means to begin again. One night, a traveler passed by, lost, tired. They gave him water. He asked, "Is this Apache land?" Samuel answered, "This is her land." The traveler looked at Nash. She nodded once. He bowed gently and rode on. And when the wind passed through the trees that night, it didn't sing. It whispered, soft, low. A woman's breath in the ears of the world. No more signs, no more warnings, only a life. Quiet and hard-earned, and in the stillness, hope. Sometimes, late at night, Samuel still heard things. A faint clink of bone, a dream of a hanging tree. But when he opened his eyes, she was always there, breathing. Not as a ghost, as a future. In the Wild West, salvation didn't arrive with choirs or banners. It came in silence, in the form of one man refusing to look away, and one woman refusing to be defined by what was done to her. This story reminds us that healing often begins in the loneliest places, not in hospitals or churches, but in caves, across firelight, in the quiet spaces between two souls who've both seen too much. And yet, dare to reach out anyway. The world is quick to hang label, to paint over our wings with shame, with silence, with signs carved in hate. But healing is never about erasing the pain. It's about carving a new shape from the ruin, letting someone hold it, letting someone stay. For those who've been broken and those who've stood helpless beside them, this is your reminder. It's not the song of the bones that lasts. It's the love that stays after the song fades. Let yourself be found. Let yourself stay. And if you must carry something, let it be a bird in flight.